saw the video, man, by the day they come across the border. But anyway though, but it's been sponsored by the people in the administration in the United Nations. And I'm gonna tell you this right here though. You might say, okay, don't affect me or you. But yes it does. Because it's more towards power and control in a voting base for the Democrat Party. You might not say you don't believe in the Constitution, but that's what we died for. That's what our ancestors died for and fought for. But I say you believe in the Bill of Rights, but that's what our ancestors died for and fought for. My ancestors, even whites, blacks, colored, Indians, you know, we all did. Even though you see that flag right there, someone did us dirty, yeah. But then we progressed and we became free under that flag too, though, with constitutional rights, with Bill of Rights, which they wish to take away from us. See, they bring these illegals over here because they believe these illegals vote Democrat. They believe these illegals vote Democrat, so that's a power move. And what the Democrats what the Democrats is pushing for, taking away your rights, the right to defend yourself. Man, it's the right to even speak up. I'm show you some videos, but enough talking.
And with even Border Patrol and law enforcement funneling migrants into the system. IOM, the International Organization for Migration. It's known as OIM in Latin America, and it's part of the United Nations. The question of where the money is coming from is answered on the IOM website. The most commonly named donor is the United States government, and it lists several sub-branches of the U.S. Agency for International Development and the U.S. State Department. The UN organization appears to work directly with the State Department. It says that its Refugee Resettlement Program, which runs on donations from the State Department's Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, provides extensive support to the U.S. government in carrying out its U.S. refugee admissions program. Among its listed services are medical, training, processing of cases, and transportation. It says the IOM branch in New York works as a liaison between the IOM and the U.S. State Department. And its website also solves some of the mystery where the migrants are getting their money. Under the Refugee Travel Loans tab of its website, it states, all refugees arriving in the United States are offered interest-free travel loans by IOM. And it says IOM arranges for refugee travel using funds furnished by the Department of State. It notes that refugees need to repay these debts within 46 months after arriving in the United States, and it passes this responsibility to NGOs, including the Church World Service, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, the International Rescue Committee, and others. American taxpayers are financing the mass migration into the United States, including for operation costs and for direct payments to the migrants. The money is going through various NGOs, which are involved in resettling refugees. And the United Nations, meanwhile, is facilitating the migration into the U.S. under the guidance of the State Department. But are all of these asylum cases legitimate? And if our own immigration and asylum courts can't keep track of migrants once they enter the United States, how can the United Nations ensure that the migrants pay back their loans to the State Department? To get a better picture of the situation, we decided to head into Mexico and see for ourselves. We met with Auden Cabello, a videographer and correspondent for Real America's Voice on the U.S. side of the border.
So I've been documenting this for about a year and a half. And then here about 2 months ago when we had the Haitian migrants, I was able to document, as I was going back from Del Rio to Acuña, I noticed a large crowd going back on the Weir Dam at the bridge. There's a large crowd going back to Acuña. That caught my attention. I was like, where are they going back? So as soon as I crossed, I went and got my drone, and I went to the area. When I got there, there was hundreds of them on the Mexican side, and I flew the drone and to follow them, see where they were going, and that's when I get to the international bridge underneath, and I see about 1,000 of them.
You stumbled across that then, pretty much.
Pretty much, I stumbled across it. Yes, that's correct. So I immediately went home, edited a quick video, uploaded it on social media, and that pretty much went viral and notified a lot of media and press. That week, that's when they descended here to Del Rio. And at the same time, that's when more Haitian migrants started arriving. We're at about 1,000 a day, then it went up to 2,000 a day, and that's how we ended up with 15,000 that were underneath the bridge. And I documented the buses that were arriving. There's over 100 buses that arrived that week to Acuña. I also documented those buses as they were arriving. So those busloads bringing other Haitians from
So someone's
Chiapas.
bringing them in through buses.
Yes, at the time, from Chiapas. That's where they're at, Tapachula, Chiapas, down here to Acuña.
Do we know who's running the buses?
I try to look into it, but the drivers, they wouldn't give any information. I did come across one, and he seemed kind of frightened. So more than likely they were being threatened to drive the Haitians, and threatened maybe by cartel members or somebody higher up that threatened them, drive this bus down to Acuña, because they were fearful. They didn't want to talk to the press.
So tell me about the situation in Mexico right now with these migrants. I mean, I understand there's two different types of migrants coming across right now, right?
Yes, so we have the asylum seekers, those that do qualify for asylum, and then those that don't qualify. And the ones that do qualify for asylum are mainly the Haitians, Cubans, Venezuelans, and they'll cross early in the morning, and they turn themselves in right to Border Patrol. They're not trying to avoid being arrested. They want to get arrested so they can get processed.
What are these documents?
So these are documents. This is a Cuban nationality, Cuba, and this guy didn't bother to.
Oh, this is his doc.
This is his whole folder. He didn't even bother to. Most of them they'll shred them, throw them away. This guy didn't bother doing none of that. So these are all the documents, and this is one of the main documents that they seek. And this is from the Mexican immigration. That way they're able to travel freely through Mexico and not get deported.
Well, why is it significant that they're able to travel freely in Mexico and they've been there long enough? Why is that significant with this?
Because Mexican immigration could arrest them and deport them to their country of origin, or where they're coming from, where they used to live. This is from a few days ago. This is a whole family from Cuba. So we have the father, mother, and child, and they're originally from Cuba, but the child was born in Costa Rica.
So
And they were-
this is a family in Costa Rica, so they probably left from Costa Rica. Not
From Cuba to Costa Rica. They were living in Costa Rica, and they had been in Mexico so long that they got their permanent residence in Mexico. And what I've gathered is that they get these so they can travel Mexico freely
I see.
until they get to the border. Once they get to the border, these are useless, so they just dump them there and,
So
and cross.
they throw them out.
They throw them out.
Well, why would they want to throw them out and not keep them while they cross?
So this is one of the main reasons, because this is telling you they were living in Costa Rica. But when they cross, they told Border Patrol, "I'm Cuban. I'm seeking asylum. I'm coming from Cuba. I'm being persecuted over there."
They need to throw these out so they can lie to Border Patrol then.
Exactly. I don't have it with me, but there are documents where there's a whole brochure. It's like a playbook teaching them from start to finish how to get through Mexico, all these points that you're mentioning, stopping points, bus stations, that there's going to be an NGO representative there to make sure they arrive at the right bus station and that they get on the right bus to the next stopping point. So they're being guided throughout the whole route.
So it's NGOs running the buses, telling them where to go, giving them brochures, teaching them how to do it. Do you know what these NGOs are?
Some of these are Catholic charities. They're tied to the Catholic Church. The funding is coming from United Nations.
United Nations is feeding this.
Yes, I would say most of the money is coming from United Nations, NGOs, Catholic Church, Catholic charities. That's the main financial structure.
When they get here to the border, There's several crossing points in Del Rio here. It was the Weir Dam, which was just upriver, the port of entry that the Haitians were using. But there's another part that's maybe about a mile upriver, which I was just there today as several groups of people made their way across. And it's a part of the river where they just wade over. But so they get turned over, and DPS is the one that's receiving them. It's not Border Patrol. And the reason I say that is because Border Patrol is too busy processing in the office. They're processing. They have very few agents that can actually go out and patrol, in their assigned areas. So, like for instance, at this place, it's called Border de Lon, and it's a crossing point. DPS receives them, then they wait and turn them over to Border Patrol, all as the National Guard stands by and watches. The National Guard is not repelling, they're not intervening, they just stand by and watch. So then, of course, Border Patrol goes, processes them. In the past, what we would do is turn them over to ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, for bed space, ERO, enforcement removal operations, and parts of the offices. But they're full. They're not prosecuted under Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas. ICE is not enforcing. They're not deporting. They're not housing them. And so that's when, like right behind this store here, about half a mile, maybe 3/4 of a mile, is the Valverde Border Humanitarian Coalition. It's a non-governmental organization, NGO, that was stood up back under these Soros caravans under Trump, and they were stood up at that point, and now they're up again, and there were busload after busload after busload of charter buses, what I call the casino charter luxury liners, that were driving up, and the Haitians were just getting bussed out. So that's what I call a mom and pop NGO here, and there they would receive them. They bathe, they get food, and they get either bus tickets or airline tickets. If they wanted to take a Greyhound, they'd get taken over the Greyhound station. If they were going to get wanted to get a plane out of San Antonio or Houston, a charter bus would come and pick them up, and that was all coordinated by the Valverde Border Humanitarian Coalition. That's one aspect of it. The mom and pops down in Eagle Pass is Mission Border Hope, and then Catholic Charities is very active in the Rio Grande Valley. Catholic Charities is in El Paso. There's also Annunciation House in El Paso.
We drove to one of the locations known to be a hot spot for illegal crossings into the United States. As we went closer to the river, we started finding identifying documents covering the ground, including discarded ID cards, driver's licenses, passports, and others. What really stood out, though, were folders that could be found scattered amid the documents.
So these are the files that they're provided. This is the UN logo. It's a UN Agency for Refugees in Spanish.
And so the United Nations gives them these pamphlets, huh?
Correct. United Nations and Mexican government as well.
As we continued our search, we encountered a group of people as they prepared to illegally cross the border. They appeared nervous and refused to speak with us. We watched, however, as one of the men threw a handful of documents into a bush, which we retrieved and examined.
They flew in from Cancun to Monterrey.
We followed them down to the river and watched as they crossed and turned themselves over to the National Guard troops on the American side of the border.
From the Mexican side, we can see military vehicles, we can see Humvees, we can see Texas National Guard, there's containers, there's a lot of law enforcement presence, but at the same time, that's not stopping or deterring illegal immigrants from crossing. They're still crossing.
They'll come over from the Mexican side. They make their way diagonally this way. They land right over there where the cane is, where the fence is. And while they're there, they change their clothing. And they just leave the clothing just laying there on the ground. They change it to dry clothes, which they usually have in a plastic bag. And then they walk out, and DPS here is waiting for them. It's not an apprehension, it's not an arrest, but they just hold them until Border Patrol comes and takes them off their hands. There's buses ready to get onto Laughlin Air Force Base. And when you see those big white buses on the side of the highway, it's usually 2 or 3, you know that they're going to take them on the base, and a 737 is going to land at some point. They're going to load up, and then they're going to fly out.
So what's really happening at the U.S.-Mexico border? Definitely not what most of us have been told. There are various gangs profiting from the mass migration along the way, but the cartels that we've been told are the main players seem to play only a minor role in the overall picture. In Del Rio, for example, they have little presence. The border wall is incomplete, and it's also been made irrelevant by government policy. What good is a wall when people cross in mass numbers, then turn themselves in and apply for asylum to get transported into the American heartland? Border Patrol and law enforcement have become the funnels for the NGOs running this operation. And even more so, the people crossing are getting paid money to do this. And that money is coming out of the pockets of American taxpayers. Many of the migrants, as we saw, intentionally hide their country of origin and discard their identities to defraud the amnesty system. Our investigation uncovered that the border crisis, in reality, is a United Nations operation being financed by the U.S. government, with the goal of moving and resettling migrants throughout the United States. And the open policy, along with the financial incentives, it is drawing people in by the hundreds of thousands.